Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to do something new that I haven't done for a while. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take this application that we built on React.js. So if you have not looked at this video, it's not required, but it would help you to understand what this application does. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this application and turn that into an Android app. And I'm going to do live coding, and I'm going to share the code with you as well in the GitHub as an open source, so you should be able to get it as a needed basis. So let's get started. Idea is basically we have this site that I built last time using a React.js application. So this site, I'm going to turn that into an Android application, so it will kind of look like a native Android application from scratch. And we'll complete that application and it will be ready to go. All right, let's get started. Before we do that, let's just look at this application. All this application is doing, of course, as you could see, it's on the internet and it's a Google book search. All I can do is type any type of book that I'm searching for. So I'm going to search for something like Android programming, and it gives me a whole bunch of books about Android programming, and the users can go click on it and drill down and then do whatever they want to do. They can look at samples, they can buy it, and all that stuff. But this entire application, we're going to build a front-end wrapper for Android, and it will look like an Android app. So let's see how we do it. The very first thing is, if you don't have the tools called Android Studio, you're going to need that. So go ahead, download this, and I'm going to try to put all the possible links that you're going to need in the description below of the YouTube video so that it helps you. So anyway, so you're going to need this Android Studio. Go ahead, download it and install it. Once you have it installed, then of course open it up, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run it, and it's taking time to come up, so it's going to come up. So it's up now. We're going to create obviously a new project, and this is going to be a simple activity. So because you can choose all kinds of different things, I'm going to go ahead and start with basic activity. Keep it simple. Choose next. And what are you going to call it? Well, I'm going to call this application Google Book Search. Keep it simple. And spell it a little bit better. And of course, I like to put my projects in this location. That's fine. You can choose and change the location that you want. Absolutely okay. And I'm going to change this thing to say ICS Discovery. Or ICS Discover dot Google Book Search. That stands for Google Book Search. So that, and keep everything else default, and I'm going to have Kotlin as my programming language, which is okay, and choose the default SDK. That's going to support 8.6% of the devices. Sounds good to me. Hit finish and let the studio do its magic, and it's doing its magic, and it's going to look like this, and it's probably going to go through some Gradle build. If I click on here, just close this initial thing and let it build, and once the build is done, I will come back. Okay, the build is done and is successful, and we are back on the code. So let's look at it a little bit. Well, of course, there's a whole bunch of Kotlin file that got created: main activity, first fragment, second fragment. And of course, there's a whole bunch of resources that automatically got created, which we're going to get rid of some of them that we don't need. But before we do that, the very first thing I would like to do is at least run the app to make sure that it runs, and just to see what does it give us. By default, we're really skeleton piece of this application that we got from Android. So in order to do that, you have to create an Android virtual device. I actually have a couple of them. One is a tablet, the other one is a phone. I'm just going to choose one. I'm just going to choose the Pixel. If you don't have one created, feel free to create one by going to, it's very simple. You just got to go to Device Manager, and then you kind of create a device and choose one of the devices, like whether it's a tablet or a phone, and just choose the recommended API. You have to download it, and so on. It's very self-explanatory, and you can even look at YouTube videos how to create one if you're not really sure, but I don't think you will have any trouble if you're doing Android Studio coding. This is probably the simplest. So it should be very simple as just point and click to create a device. So once you have a device, it will show up on your list. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and start the device. And I can start it on a debug mode. That's absolutely fine. And it will take some time for it to come up. As you can see, it's coming up right here, and it's already okay. Now the Android emulator is up. Now this step you don't have to do if you don't want to. What I like to do is I don't like this small screen. So what I typically do is go to the emulator and say that I want to float this thing. That way I can kind of make this thing bigger and have it side by side, which makes it easier for me to debug and view and also test properly. There you go. Okay, so the next thing is we're going to go ahead and launch this app to see how the app looks like. It's coming up, and there we go, it's up. Okay, great. This is all nice and good, but remember, what we're trying to build is just basically a front end for that simple Google book search. So we probably not going to need a lot of those things that by default comes with it, right? For example, this little mail icon here, this next button here, and all of this little text here, and this little dot dot dot. So surgically we're going to move those things out of our code one by one. So let's get to it. The very first thing, let's go to our layout. You can expand the layout and go to the content main. The way it works is your activity main is probably going to be the main XML file where you have the main container. You can go through the code and verify this. And this container literally has that button right here. So we can do it multiple ways. All right, I'll show you multiple ways. You can go to the design and kind of go ahead and remove it from here. Or I could have gone through the code and just removed it manually. Now, one thing you'll note that it's including another layout, content main, which is this guy right here. And this content main, if you look at the code, all it's doing is just holding the navigation host fragment. All right, what is that? That's just a fancy name of saying that there is a navigation component that Android has, which is kind of like in here, navigation. And this one tells you what are the fragments that it is holding. Okay, so that's basically what this is. Well, as you could tell that we're probably not going to need the second fragment, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that one. It's out of the picture. And we're probably going to need the first fragment, but we're going to go ahead and change the name to something that we like. I don't want to call it this fragment right here. I can go change that to say this is really going to be my web fragment because we're going to show a website. And yeah, go ahead, do the refactor. I don't care. And I'm going to go ahead and change the label as well to say instead of first fragment, we're going to say web fragment label. And then kind of like just say okay, and of course as you can see it gives me a red. That means I'm gonna have to go and change it somewhere else, which is fine. I'm just gonna do Control Z and it won't let me change it. That's absolutely okay. So let's go ahead and try to change it where I'm supposed to change it. Okay, it's probably going to be in the string value. So let's go to string and we're going to make some changes here. So we definitely don't want to call this first fragment label. Now the right way to do this is change that, say right click and do a refactor rename, and we're going to call that web fragment label. Now better yet, I'm thinking that we probably don't need this, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all of these stuff, pretty much all this hello, all this junk, and let's rename this thing to make it look a little bit nicer, Google Book Search. And as soon as you do it, I know that it's being used here at least, because that's where it came from, to this code, and see how it's red. So here, instead of pointing to the first fragment label, I'm going to point to app name, which will say the Google Book Search. That's going to show up at the top. Absolutely fine with me. I don't have any issue. The next thing is I don't want the ID to be called first fragment. I'll call it web fragment. That's good. And the next thing it says layout is the fragment first. So what layout is this? This is probably the layout that is pointing to this guy right here. So I'm going to go ahead and change that as well. Best way to do it is do a refactor and call it fragment web. and do that refactor right here, and it's done. And we don't need this second fragment, so I'm going to get rid of it. Delete that, and it's gone. And it will tell you when it deletes that, do you want to see where it's being used? Yeah, it's a good idea to see where it's being used. Well, potentially references, as you can see, it's going to show you that it's being used in one of these binding plays. It's being used in whatever this thing is, some kind of scrolling binding search thing. Okay, great, no problem. And then it was also used in the import. Fine, we'll deal with all of that and we'll find it in a second. So for now, I'm just going to say go ahead, just delete it. Who cares? Let it break. All right, so it's all deleted, and of course the first thing that comes out here is this red thing right here. We called it a web fragment, so I'm going to go ahead and change that. It's basically saying that what would be your first destination, and we renamed it to web fragment, this guy right here, ID, so that's what we're going to name it, and it's all good. So navigation graph, you can see the design, and you can kind of see how it looks right now, of course. Now, other thing we want to do is, yeah, it's nice and good. We renamed it to fragment web, which is okay, but I don't like, we don't need this button text, we don't need this text view first. So I'm going to start getting rid of it. So you can either delete from here, easiest thing to do, delete from here. We don't need any of that stuff. What we need is we need to put a web view right here, okay, something that we're going to show a web. So you're going to go to widgets, and there's a web view right here, and just go ahead, you can drag and drop right here and let it edit automatically. So you'll see that it got added. Great, not a problem. I want the whole screen to be added like this. Then the next thing you want to do is, of course, give it an ID, and I want to call that a web underscore view. You can call it whatever you want, but whatever you're calling it here, it's going to be shown. We need to reference that from our code. So we called it a web view, absolutely fine, no problem. You can look at the code. All this fragment has is a web view. Cool, no problem. And since it had buttons and all that other stuff, it added this namespace, which it looks like we don't need that right now. So you can pretty much get rid of it, and it will be fine too. Okay, so what's next? Well, we did a lot of coding. What I like to do is code a little, run a little. So that's the philosophy we're going to follow. Okay, following that philosophy, of course, I can see right now that there are errors, but I'm still going to run it just to show you that, it's not going to work. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this build thing right here, where it's going to tell me that it's not going to work because you got all of these errors. And we're going to go look at each of those errors and try to fix them. I know for sure that we need to get rid of this second fragment, which doesn't exist. So I'm going to go ahead and check this code right now. Delete, and I could do a search, sure, not a problem, and it got deleted. And then this first fragment, it has reference to certain things that doesn't exist. If you remember, the way it works is every time you create a layout, a file, it automatically creates a data binding Kotlin file associated with it, and the name actually follows. So we called it fragment web instead of fragment first. So here, instead of calling it fragment first binding, and I guess this thing is not smart enough to refactor this, so we're gonna have to do it ourselves. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a find replace and try to find everything that is this and change it to, instead of first binding, I think we called it web, to this. And let's go ahead, so replace all, and there it is, and I can tell that it is good. Now the other thing is, if you recall, it's doing all kinds of button first thing and all that because it used to have a button. We don't need any of that junk. So I can literally get rid of this code. No need any button. And so far looks good, and I can click on each of these errors and see, okay, this one we fixed it, this one we fixed it, this one we did, and this one we fixed it. Okay, go ahead, let's rerun this guy. And it seems to be compiling, and it's going to come up in a second. Okay, so looks like it didn't come up because we got more errors, and this time the error came from the main activity. So let's go look at that one. It looks like it is fussing about some kind of FAB. It is actually, if you recall, this button right here, this button was a floating button, so that's the one that is fussing about. Well, we don't have that button anymore, so we're just going to get rid of this code. We really don't need anything like that. And that should be okay, I'm thinking, because I don't see the error anymore. And let's double check to make sure. Okay, that's not there and that's not there either. So let's go ahead and rerun it. And it's coming up. Okay, it came up, as you could see, that kind of close to what we needed. So there is that web view, which we don't have anything yet. And we got rid of the button and it's called Google Book Search. That's what you want to call it. What we don't like is this ... because we don't want to do anything with the settings yet. So we need to get rid of it somehow. So let's look at the code. The way it works, and before I do that, let me do one more thing. This first fragment, I don't like the name, so I'm going to go ahead and change that to web fragment. That's what we have been talking about, web fragment. Okay, good. So now how do we get rid of this thing? So this thing is nothing but it is coming out of this menu item right here, called the main menu. And the way you get rid of it is basically, it's a weird way that Android lets you do it, is you kind of have to get to the menu item and enable it and then kind of say don't show it. Kind of sounds goofy, but that's the best way to do it. All right, so how is that? Well, first what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and override a method called onCreate. So let's go ahead and add that. So we're going to override this guy right here, an onCreate method, that we're just going to say that, well, we need to show the options menu because we're probably going to use it in the future. We'll see. And then the next thing is there is also another method that we need to override that is called onPrepared options menu. So that is what is required to actually hide that piece of the menu. So here, onPrepared menu, options menu, what we're doing there is basically saying that find the menu item called action settings. Now, how do I know that's the name of it? Is you can actually go right here, menu item, and either look at here, that's the ID right here, or you can even look at the code. That seems to be the ID. So I'm going to go ahead and say, find that item and turn that visibility flag to false. Okay, looks good. Now let's recode it a little, let's test it a little. So I'm going to go ahead and restart this thing quickly. And you could actually done this one too if you wanted to just apply the code. That's also another way to do it, but it's coming up right now. And it's almost there. It's up, as you could see. It got rid of that menu item, so we don't need it. So that's good. So let's move on. Okay, so now that we have this nice skeleton, and what we need to do right now is put an actual web page that we're going to load. That's going to look like an app. So the very first thing is, since this is going to be an internet-based applications, we're going to have to go to the manifest file and give some permission, or at least request some permission. So there's two permissions we're going to need. One is the network access state, and the other one is basically the internet. So these two permissions we need to add, otherwise it's not going to do anything. Then another thing we're going to do is we're going to send text traffic back and forth. So we also have to add this piece of the information. Basically says use clear text traffic true. Otherwise we may end up getting some weird issues. All right, so what's the next step? The next step is we need to have a holder for our web view, and I'm going to put that on the main activity, and you will find out why I'm doing it in the main activity instead of in the web fragment, because we're going to have to do something in the future with this web view. So I'm going to go ahead and have a static variable called web view. The way you declare a static variable, you basically have something like a companion object, and you mention that web view, and there's a web view, and initially it will be null. So that's how we're going to declare it. Then the next thing is, of course, we're going to have to put something in that web fragment, basically load it. How do I do it? Well, it's not that hard. The first thing you want to do is you basically wanted to get a reference to the web view from your current binding code, right? So here, if you recall, we already had a web view that we defined as a static variable in the main activity. So automatically give us that you want to import it. Yes, I want to import that. So that variable we're basically initializing from this bind code, which is nothing but basically saying go to the layout for this web fragment and find out the ID web view. So it's literally pointing to this guy right here. So it's basically saying give me a reference to this specific widget. Okay, now that we have that, the next thing is to load the URL. And if you recall, the URL we are trying to load is, of course, this URL right here. Pretty simple. So we can copy that and we'll say web view dot, and there's a load URL right here. And you can pretty much hard code it like that, and which is absolutely fine, and it will be okay. Now you could see this little error here. It's basically saying that, hey, you have a null object. Basically this object can be null, so you need to do a null check reference. So go ahead, just click on this. It's basically just going to put two exclamation point to say that if it's not null, then load the URL. Okay, sounds good. Let's go ahead and, like I said, code a little, test a little, see if it works. All I'm going to do now, you can actually hit this apply code changes instead of running this. That also works. If this doesn't work, then you go fall back to that one. So let's go ahead, click on this and see if it comes up right on. Of course, the changes were not applied, as you could see. It errored out. Modifications to Android manifest.xml requires an app restart. So you just have to click on this guy. So let's go ahead, let it come up. Of course, this time it's up, but look what it says. It says you need to enable JavaScript to run this app. That means there's something that we got to do. It's just loading the URL is not enough. So let's get to it. So we're going to have to turn on a whole bunch of things to be able to get this thing to work. So first thing, it says to load the JavaScript or enable the JavaScript. So here it is. You basically get the settings and then say JavaScript enabled and set it to true. So we have done that. This time we're just going to say apply the code and let's see what happens. And it's coming up. Of course, it's still not up. I think there is one more piece of code that you're going to need to get this thing up and running, which I'm missing here. Is you're going to have to say that this is really using the default WebView web client. So we're going to do that, and let's go ahead, try to apply the code and see what happens. It actually did not work. So what I had to do is basically just shut off the application and click on the debug again to kind of restart the whole app because it's dealing with settings and new web client. And then it came up, which is good, absolutely fine. So let's go ahead and see if we could do a search. So I'm going to go ahead and search for some book. All right, good. It's coming up. When I click on it, it goes there. Very good. But one thing that you probably have seen, that the images are not coming up on the previous screen, right? And then let's back up. This is not good either, because when I'm going back, instead of coming back to the previous page, it's kind of like minimizing the app, which is not what we want. So let's fix that. Okay, first of all, we're going to have to turn on a whole bunch of other flags, I think, to get our image working. So that is DOM storage enabled, load images automatically to true, and then mixed content mode, and this should be the mixed content always allow. So I'm going to turn all this thing on, and then one more thing we're going to do to get the back thing working properly is we're going to have to go back to the main activity, because main activity is where there is actually a method that we can override to basically say that, hey, when someone is pressing the back button, we need to do something special instead of the default stuff that you're doing. So we're going to basically do this piece of code right here. If you read the code, all it's saying is web view, and if you recall, I was saying that there's a reason why I'm declaring the web view right here. That is the reason, because I need a reference to that specific web view from the main activity. So here I'm saying that if the web view is not null and the web view, there is a way I can go back, then go back when someone presses the back key. Otherwise, just go ahead and shut down the activity and close the task. So if it's the search screen, the very first time that someone presses the back button, there's no like search that happened, then it's just going to close the screen. Otherwise, when you hit the back button, it's supposed to come back to the search screen. So let's see if that happens or not. Just for the sake of it, I'm just going to go ahead and stop everything and then restart. Okay, it's up, and let's test it now. You can go ahead and search for one mask. There we go. Now the image comes in, absolutely okay. Good, I can click on it. It comes up, and if I hit the back button, it comes back to the same screen that we really wanted. And if I hit the back button again, then so you can see the application is gone, so it's functioning the way we want it to work. However, there is one last thing that we have to do, which I call it polishing. So if you look at the list of applications, so this is that application that we just built, and it's got this default Android looking icon, which you may like it, I don't like it, I just want to put my own custom icon. How do I do it? So let's get to that. Okay, so what's the process? The very first thing you want to do is kind of like try to understand how the launcher icon kind of works. So this is where the basic of the launcher icons are. There's the background and there's the foreground, and this is kind of what it creates, that kind of look. And then there's also this little bitmaps that you could see, basically the WebP version of the images that drives it. And then you got the XML, which is kind of like the vector assets. that's where drives that as well. And if you look at the vector piece, it says I have the background, I have the foreground, and add those two together, you're going to get the icon. Similar thing, the round stuff is doing the same thing. I get the background and the foreground, and you get the icon. Well, the very first thing I'm going to do is I don't like any of the existing web piece, so I'm going to go ahead and completely delete them. Delete them, and then just go ahead and say delete anyway. I don't really care. And delete these things as well. I don't want any of these images at all. I'm going to delete all the WebP files. I'm sorry, XML files. Okay, so this XMLs are good. Then let's create something for the background and something for the foreground. Well, background, I don't think I have too much issues with that as far as I can tell. The only thing that I have issues with is the background color. I just don't like this goofy green color. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to say let's use something that what came with this template that Android gave me by default. So I'm going to look at my color template and actually like the color white. I want the white to be the background. So let's go ahead and make it white. Done. My background is done. The foreground, we're going to have to do a little bit more work. So foreground, we got this image, we don't like it. So the very first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and let's create a different foreground. Okay? Well, before doing that, let's go ahead and rename this guy to something else. So let's say refactor, rename, and call this foreground underscore old. And refactor this. And remember, whatever this thing is used, it's going to change that to underscore old. So for example, if you look at the launcher icon, which relies on these drawables, this launcher icon now points to old. This one also points to old. So once we get our new drawable, we're going to have to point to this new one and change this code as well. Well, how do I do it? So let's go ahead and create a new drawable. So you just say new and go to like vector asset. And there's a whole bunch of built-in clip art that we can use. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Well, first of all, let's change the name to, of course, not that. Let's go ahead and copy the name. We want the name to be foreground. Oh, come on. Foreground, and then let's go back to that screen again. Vector assets. And the name has to be this. That's what we want it to call. And let's choose the clip art. And the clip art that we're going to choose is, of course, it's going to be something that we can search for. So you can either search for books or book, and there's a whole bunch of built-in icon that kind of looks like books, and I don't like any one of them. It's a Google book search. So let's look at what search. Okay, there's some good nice icon. And I kind of like that. A book search kind of like this one, so let's choose that one. All right, there it is. And then we're gonna have to choose a color. Well, I'm gonna leave that for now. Let's just choose whatever they're choosing for us and say next and say finish. All right, so we got the icon, and of course it automatically renamed that to manage search and all that business, which we don't like. I'm gonna go ahead and rename that to what we like, which we wanted to call foreground, and they change it to foreground. So one thing I'm going to do is go ahead, say format this properly so I can kind of look at the code. So say code reformat. All right, so this color, I don't like this color, so I want this color to be something that I really like to change, that is kind of like a built-in template color. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to say not black. Look at my current color codes, and I really like, let's say it's a dark color that I'm going to like. 200, 500, 700, let's put the darkest one, purple. So that's a nice color that I like. So I'm going to put that as my color, and then one last change, a couple of last changes. I don't need this anymore, but before I delete that, I'm going to have to go there and say it's not old anymore. I need the one that I just built, foreground. As you can see, it shows up right away. And I want that one that I just got. And then go ahead and get rid of this guy right here. Go ahead and say delete everything. All right, so we are pretty much done. So now the last step is just go ahead uninstall this to have a fresh start. And then let's go ahead and start it back up, and let's see how the icon looks like now. Okay, we haven't changed the functionality. As you know, it's still gonna do the same thing. So if I just search for programming pool, and we'll find whatever the book that's there available, and then I can click on it and hit the back button once, back button twice. The test should be gone, and it's gone. Now let's look at the icon. There we go. Voila, our new icon right here. So now that you have seen that I have built a complete application on Android that is based on actually an existing website that kind of looks like an app that is inside the Android, and it's a complete applications from A to Z. If this video helps you increase your skill or help you with your skill, please do subscribe my channel, and please do like my videos, and also don't forget to look at my other videos and all the links that I am going to put in my description. And I'm going to put this code on the GitHub for free, open source, so feel free to check it out and basically just look at the code, how it works. And if you are lazy person like me, if you don't really want to code through the entire video the way I was showing you step by step, there's another easy way to do this. The easy way is basically this. So it's going to be basically this, as simple as this. You install your Android Studio code, check out the Google book search from the open source repository that I have, which is nothing but doing this command, git clone, and there's a repository that I'm going to put it in the description below. And then just go ahead, run the application, and you can look at the code exactly what I did inside. So it's just going to look exactly the same as what I just showed you, which is pretty much this. So that's about it. If you like my videos and if this helped you, again, please do subscribe my channel, hit that bell icon, and also like my videos. And thanks for stopping by. Until next time, peace and bye.